seizing on Anne's comments about the size of the monarchy.
She didn't think a slimmed-down monarchy was a good idea.
What if the most powerful voice in the royal family wasn't the king or the heir to the throne, but someone who married into it?
I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you personally for all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
Behind palace walls, a sealed letter, a quiet note from the late Queen, and one unexpected name changed everything. When people talk about the British royal family, two names often come up when it comes to stability, loyalty, and years of dedicated service: Prince Charles, now King Charles III, and his younger sister, Princess Anne. Both have spent their entire lives under the spotlight, representing the monarchy through decades of change, challenges, and public scrutiny. But recently, attention has quietly shifted to another member of the royal family, someone who wasn't born into royalty, but has grown into a role few could have predicted with such grace. That person is Kate Middleton. This story takes place inside Windsor Castle, a historic symbol of British heritage and royal power. But unlike grand ceremonies or public announcements, this moment unfolded in private. It wasn't meant for cameras or newspaper headlines. It was personal, a rare glimpse into the quiet, emotional heart of a family known for its formal image. In the hours following a major shift in the royal household, senior members of the family gathered in one of the castle's most private rooms. The atmosphere was still, tense. There were no reporters outside the door, no press conferences lined up. Just the sound of heavy silence and the quiet presence of people waiting. People who had spent their lives performing royal duties, now waiting to hear something they weren't entirely prepared for. It was Princess Anne who entered the room alone. She didn't bring a team of aides or walk in with any ceremony. She didn't need to. Her presence alone, composed and familiar, was enough to command attention. In her hand was a letter, sealed with red wax, formal in appearance but deeply personal in nature. This letter, according to royal insiders, contained the final private words of King Charles III, written not for the public, but for his family. Anne, often seen as one of the most grounded and consistent members of the royal family, walked to the center of the room. Without raising her voice, she began to read. Her tone was steady, her pacing deliberate. As she spoke, the people around her leaned in, not wanting to miss a word. There were no interruptions, no questions, just focused listening. The message started in a way that many expected. Words about family, legacy, duty. But it soon took a turn that no one in the room had quite anticipated. Instead of focusing on Prince William, the next in line to the throne, the letter centered on someone else: Kate Middleton. Until that moment, most had assumed that the letter would formally acknowledge William as the future king, perhaps offering him guidance or personal reflections on leadership. But instead, it became clear that King Charles had used this final message to highlight the woman who would stand beside him. Not with ceremonial language or flowery praise, but with direct, sincere words about her character, her resilience, and her growing role in the future of the monarchy. Kate Middleton, formerly known as Catherine, Princess of Wales, had always played her role with a quiet kind of strength. She hadn't made headlines with dramatic gestures or bold public statements. Instead, she had built a reputation for consistency, calm under pressure, and a genuine sense of duty. Over the years, many royal commentators and members of the public had started to notice how central she was becoming to the royal family, not just as Prince William's wife, but as a figure of leadership in her own right. For Prince William, hearing his father's final reflections hit harder than expected. Those in the room described his reaction not as dramatic, but deeply emotional. There was no grand display of grief or theatrical sadness. Instead, his posture shifted. His head lowered slightly. His hands tightened around the arms of his chair. It was a quiet but clear reaction from someone who had been preparing for a very different moment his entire life. William had always understood that his role would be shaped by tradition. He was raised with that expectation. His education, public training, and experience were all aimed at one goal: becoming king one day. So hearing that his father's final thoughts had moved beyond the usual script and chosen to focus on Kate was more than just surprising. It was transformative. This wasn't a challenge to William's role as future king, nor was it a denial of the line of succession. Instead, it was a recognition that the future of the monarchy wouldn't rest on a single pair of shoulders. It would be shaped by partnership, stability, and the ability to adapt. In highlighting Kate's role, King Charles was sending a clear message to his family, and perhaps to the public at large, that the institution needed more than just tradition to survive. It needed people like Kate. Why was Princess Anne the one to deliver this message? That choice wasn't accidental. Anne has long been seen as one of the most dependable members of the royal family. She keeps a low profile, focuses on her work, and rarely seeks public attention. She is respected across the board, both inside and outside the royal household. By choosing Anne as the messenger, King Charles was likely making a deliberate point. This wasn't a political decision or a media strategy. It was personal, and he wanted someone he trusted without question to carry it forward. Anne's delivery of the message carried the same tone she's known for: measured, composed, honest. Her voice didn't waver. Her expression remained calm. But those in the room could tell that the weight of the message was not lost on her. This was, after all, a moment that marked a subtle but significant shift in the history of the British monarchy. The most powerful reactions, though, weren't spoken out loud. They were seen in the small moments: glances exchanged between family members, the way people shifted in their seats, and the long pause that followed Anne's final words. And perhaps most notably, in the way Kate responded. She didn't stand up to make a statement. She didn't shed a tear or break into emotional gestures. Instead, she simply reached out her hand and placed it gently on Prince William's back. It was a small moment, but a telling one. It showed support, quiet confidence, and unity, traits that have come to define her public and private role within the family. Unlike the sealed letter from King Charles, this note showed signs of age. The paper was slightly yellowed, with gentle creases where it had been folded, opened, and folded again, likely many times over the years. The handwriting was immediately recognizable to anyone who had worked with or followed the monarchy closely. It was the handwriting of Queen Elizabeth II. There was a noticeable shift in the room. The air seemed to tighten again, not out of fear, but out of respect. For more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth had served as a symbol of continuity. She had guided the royal family and the nation through social, political, and personal change. Her passing in 2022 had marked the end of an era, and even after her death, her influence was still deeply felt. What Anne held was not an official document. It wasn't a legal instruction or a formal royal directive. It was a handwritten note, personal and brief. It contained just one sentence. But that single sentence carried the weight of a monarch who had seen more, experienced more, and understood more about leadership than perhaps anyone else in modern British history. She will be the pillar that holds it all together. That was all it said. No name, no flourish, just that simple, clear statement. But in the context of what had just taken place, King Charles's final message, the emotional reaction from Prince William, and the growing recognition of Kate Middleton's role, the meaning was unmistakable. Queen Elizabeth had been referring to Kate. What stood out to many was the timing. This note wasn't written recently. According to those familiar with the royal archives, it had been written years before Queen Elizabeth's death, long before King Charles's health became a concern, and well before any conversations about succession or transition had reached the public. This wasn't a last-minute endorsement. It was the result of years of careful observation and thoughtful reflection. Queen Elizabeth was known for her ability to read people. Throughout her reign, she had worked with prime ministers, world leaders, and family members under extraordinary circumstances. Her sense of judgment was widely respected, and she rarely made personal endorsements of this kind. For her to put this thought into writing in her own hand was unusual and significant. The note, while short, was packed with meaning. The word pillar suggested not just strength, but stability. Not someone who leads from the front with loud speeches or sweeping gestures, but someone who holds everything together quietly and reliably. And that description fit Kate Middleton perfectly. By this point, Kate had already been in the royal family for over a decade. During that time, she had developed a public image built not on flash or controversy, but on consistency. She rarely spoke out in public about internal matters. She didn't respond to criticism with headlines or interviews. Instead, she focused on her work, her family, and fulfilling her role with calm professionalism. The Queen had likely noticed that while other members of the royal family had sometimes been caught up in scandal or public friction, Kate had remained steady. Her presence had been quietly reassuring, both to the family and to the wider public. She had supported William through major transitions and had taken on increasing responsibilities without complaint. When Princess Anne read that note aloud, she didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The message was complete in itself. But what followed was perhaps even more revealing. Anne offered her own thoughts, not as a form of commentary, but as a personal observation. She spoke plainly, saying that in her view, the Queen had been absolutely right. Kate hadn't been trained for the role she now held. She hadn't been molded or coached in a way that would explain her natural fit. These qualities, Anne said, were simply part of who she was. And at that moment, Anne didn't direct her gaze toward Prince William. She didn't seek validation from others in the room. Her attention was focused directly on Kate. It was a quiet, subtle gesture, but one that made the message even clearer. This wasn't about titles or birthright. It was about character. Over the years, some commentators had described Kate as the perfect royal spouse, elegant, polite, well-dressed, and media-friendly. But what was being recognized in that room went far deeper than public image. It was about emotional intelligence, about the ability to manage pressure, about someone who had become a stabilizing force within a family that had faced more than its fair share of turmoil. Kate's reaction to all of this was, as expected, understated. She didn't speak. She didn't react with visible emotion. She remained composed, nodding slightly, offering a quiet smile that was both gracious and reserved. It was the kind of moment that might pass unnoticed in a different setting. But here, it said everything. In many ways, this second message, the one from Queen Elizabeth, carried even more weight than the first. King Charles's letter had been personal and heartfelt, but it reflected a father's wishes. The Queen's note, brief as it was, carried the authority of someone who had seen every side of royal life and leadership. It was a judgment made with distance, perspective, and experience. To hear these words spoken aloud in the same room where so many expectations had just been upended only added to the emotional complexity of the moment. This wasn't a challenge to the succession or a shift in constitutional structure. Prince William was still the heir to the throne. That wasn't in question. But the clear takeaway was that Kate's role would be far more than ceremonial. She wasn't just a support to William. She was a cornerstone for the entire institution. Some in the room may have felt conflicted, unsure of what this all meant in practical terms. Others likely saw it as confirmation of what had already become obvious. The monarchy was evolving, not through grand declarations, but through moments like this. What Princess Anne had delivered that day was more than 2 pieces of paper. She had delivered a new vision for the future, one where tradition and modernity didn't have to clash, but could instead coexist, where quiet strength was just as valuable as public authority, and where someone like Kate Middleton could be seen not just as part of the royal family, but as a central figure in its future. Before she became one of the most watched and photographed women in the world, Kate Middleton lived a life that in many ways was very ordinary. She wasn't raised in a palace or surrounded by royal tradition. She was born in Reading, Berkshire in 1982, into a middle-class family that valued hard work, stability, and respect for others. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had worked their way up from modest beginnings, building a successful family business that allowed them to provide a secure and supportive home for their 3 children, Kate, Pippa, and James. The Middletons weren't aristocrats or members of the British elite. They didn't have titles, nor did they come from long lines of nobility. But what they did have was a strong sense of family and a practical approach to life. These values would become part of Kate's foundation, shaping the way she would later approach the responsibilities and pressures of royal life. Kate attended Marlborough College, a respected boarding school known for its strong academics and well-rounded environment. While she participated in sports and extracurricular activities, she never seemed to seek the spotlight. Former classmates have described her as friendly, reliable, and calm under pressure. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room or the person who dominated attention. Instead, she carried herself with quiet confidence, something that would later become one of her defining traits as a member of the royal family. After Marlborough, Kate made a life-changing decision to attend the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. It was here, as most people now know, that she met Prince William. But at the time, there was no media circus or public frenzy. They were simply two students navigating university life like everyone else, going to lectures, attending social events, and figuring out what came next. Their initial connection wasn't marked by royal drama or sudden romance. It started with friendship. They shared classes and social circles, and over time that friendship slowly grew into something deeper. According to people who knew them during those early years, their relationship developed gradually, built on shared experiences and genuine compatibility. There were no grand declarations or attempts to fast-track anything. They took their time, and that steady approach helped them lay the groundwork for a lasting partnership. From the beginning, Kate didn't try to reshape herself to fit into a royal mold. She didn't put on an act or change her personality to impress William. She remained grounded and true to who she was. That authenticity stood out. Even as rumors began to spread in the media about their growing relationship, Kate remained composed and discreet. She didn't give interviews or seek attention. She stayed focused on her studies and kept her personal life private. As the media picked up on the possibility that William had found a long-term partner, attention began to build. Photographers began following Kate around, hoping to capture a candid moment. Headlines speculated about engagement dates, family approval, and how she might fit into royal life. Through it all, Kate maintained a quiet presence. She didn't respond to the frenzy. She didn't try to control the narrative. She simply kept showing up, day after day, without allowing the pressure to change her. It wasn't just the public that noticed. Inside the royal family, her approach made an impression. There was no drama, no scandal, no need for damage control. Kate managed the growing interest in her life with patience and dignity. That calm and balanced approach helped reinforce the idea that she might truly be prepared for the pressures that came with life as a royal. The relationship between Kate and William continued to grow throughout their university years. There were ups and downs, as there are in any relationship, but the foundation remained strong. By the time William decided to propose, it was clear to most observers that this wasn't a rushed decision. The two had spent years getting to know each other not just in public, but behind closed doors, where real character is revealed. William chose to propose in Kenya, a place far from the media and the expectations of royal tradition. It was private, thoughtful, and very much in line with how their relationship had always been. He gave Kate his mother's engagement ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, an emotional and meaningful choice. When the engagement was announced publicly, Kate once again handled the attention with composure. She appeared confident, relaxed, and completely at ease, even as her name was being mentioned around the world. At this point, Kate Middleton was no longer just a private citizen. She was stepping into a role that came with extraordinary expectations. The British royal family is one of the most visible institutions in the world, and every move made by its members is watched, recorded, and discussed. Marrying into that kind of visibility is not something that can be fully prepared for in advance. Yet, from the beginning, Kate showed that she could handle the challenge. Much of her strength came from the way she had been raised. Her upbringing wasn't about privilege or wealth. It was about showing respect, being responsible, and staying grounded. These were values that didn't change when cameras showed up or when critics began to analyze her every move. They remained consistent, and so did she. After the engagement, Kate's public profile changed overnight. She began attending more official events, learning about royal protocols, and preparing for her future duties. But throughout this process, she never lost her sense of calm. She didn't rush to redefine herself. Instead, she gradually adapted, learning how to balance tradition with her own personality. Royal watchers and insiders began to notice that Kate wasn't just quietly doing her job, she was doing it exceptionally well. Whether visiting charities, attending state events, or simply walking into a crowded room, she did so with a natural ease that made people feel comfortable. She had a way of making the formal feel personal and accessible, which is a rare and valuable skill within the royal family. Her relationship with Prince William continued to strengthen as well. They appeared united, supportive of each other, and well-matched. In interviews, William often spoke of Kate with deep respect and admiration. It was clear that their relationship wasn't just a royal match, it was a true partnership. By the time their wedding was announced, Kate Middleton had already begun to redefine what it meant to join the royal family. She hadn't done it with big speeches or dramatic moments. She had done it slowly, carefully, and with quiet determination. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention, but she had become a central figure nonetheless. Looking back at those early years, it's clear that Kate's path to royal life wasn't shaped by privilege or position. It was shaped by character. Her ability to stay grounded, even when the world was watching, set her apart. Her natural sense of calm, her willingness to learn, and her respect for the role she was stepping into made her not just suitable for royal life, but uniquely prepared for it. On April 29, 2011, people across the globe paused to watch a moment that had been anticipated for years, the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. It wasn't just a royal wedding. For many, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter for the British monarchy. An estimated 2.5 billion people tuned in worldwide, from crowded cities to remote villages, watching the ceremony unfold in real time. The scene at Westminster Abbey was grand, rich with tradition and pageantry. But at the heart of it all was something much simpler. A young couple deeply connected and ready to step into their shared future. Kate's arrival at the Abbey was one of the most memorable moments of the day. She stepped out of the royal car wearing a lace-sleeved gown designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen. The dress became iconic almost immediately, not just because of its design, but because of how Kate wore it. She looked poised, calm, and completely composed. There was no sign of nerves or discomfort. She didn't appear overwhelmed by the size of the audience or the pressure of the moment. Instead, she seemed prepared, focused, grounded. Her walk down the aisle, accompanied by her father, was watched not just with admiration, but with a certain kind of curiosity. This was a woman who had entered public life without seeking it, who had managed to navigate years of intense media attention with almost no public missteps. Now, she was joining one of the most historic and scrutinized institutions in the world, and yet she appeared completely at ease. The ceremony itself was traditional in format, blending religious significance with royal custom. There were hymns, readings, and symbolic rituals, all performed in the presence of family, world leaders, and invited guests. But despite the scale and spectacle, the most compelling moments were often the quietest ones. The way Kate glanced at William, the stillness in her posture as vows were exchanged, the natural way she carried herself in front of billions of eyes. After the ceremony, the couple traveled by carriage through the streets of London, waving to massive crowds gathered to celebrate. People cheered, waved flags, and lined the roads for a glimpse of the newlyweds. Later, on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, William and Kate shared the now famous kiss, brief, modest, and instantly captured by photographers around the world. It was the perfect fairy tale ending to the day. But for the couple, and especially for Kate, it was also the beginning of something far more complex. Becoming a royal isn't just about titles and appearances. It means stepping into a role that requires constant visibility, strict adherence to protocol, and a deep understanding of public expectations. For Kate, the honeymoon period was short. She quickly began her duties as a working royal, taking on engagements, supporting charities, and representing the crown both in the UK and abroad. Every event, every outfit, every smile was photographed, dissected, and discussed. From the beginning, Kate approached these responsibilities with quiet discipline. She didn't try to change the monarchy or draw attention to herself. She listened, learned, and observed. Royal insiders have often remarked on how seriously she took her preparation. She spent time understanding the institutions she visited, researching causes, and making sure she was well informed before stepping in front of cameras or speaking at events. Her early royal engagements were marked by a kind of cautious confidence. She wasn't overly polished or rehearsed, but she came across as genuine and respectful. She understood that the role wasn't about personal fame, it was about service. And over time, the public began to see that consistency wasn't just a personality trait, it was a strategy. Kate also found her own areas of interest, focusing particularly on early childhood development, mental health, and family well-being. She didn't just lend her name to charities. She visited them regularly, worked with experts, and in some cases, helped develop long-term initiatives. Her work in these areas began to shape public conversations, not with dramatic gestures, but with careful planning and sustained attention. Behind the scenes, her transition wasn't always easy. Royal life involves enormous pressure. There are public expectations to meet, media stories to ignore, and moments of exhaustion that aren't always visible to the outside world. Still, Kate didn't show signs of stress in public. She didn't disappear when things become difficult. Instead, she kept showing up. Event after event. Year after year. Over time, it became clear that Kate's presence in the royal family wasn't just supportive, it was central. As the Queen aged and King Charles began to take on more responsibilities, other members of the family began to play increasingly public roles. But Kate's consistency set her apart. She wasn't just attending events, she was shaping what royal engagement looked like in a modern world. Her relationship with William also remained a point of interest. They presented a united front, both publicly and privately. Their shared appearances were often marked by natural chemistry and mutual respect. Kate wasn't overshadowed by William, nor did she try to take over the spotlight. They appeared as equals, each supporting the other in their roles. Even during moments of wider royal tension, such as the departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from senior royal duties, Kate maintained her composure. She didn't comment publicly, and she wasn't drawn into speculation. Instead, she remained focused on her work and her family, reinforcing the sense that she was a steady figure during uncertain times. As the years passed, that steadiness began to be recognized not just by the public, but by senior members of the royal family. Kate's calm presence, her refusal to react impulsively, and her deep understanding of what the monarchy represents all contributed to her increasing influence. She wasn't loud, but she was strong. She wasn't dramatic, but she was dependable. When King Charles and Princess Anne later referenced her in private messages, describing her as a central figure in the future of the monarchy, it wasn't a surprise to those paying attention. Kate had earned that recognition not through grand speeches or public declarations, but through a long and consistent record of showing up, doing the work, and staying true to herself. Today, more than a decade after that historic wedding, Kate Middleton is no longer seen as just the Duchess of Cambridge or even just the Princess of Wales. She's seen as someone who represents the future of the royal family. She doesn't need a crown to be influential. Her influence comes from trust, the kind of trust that builds slowly over time through presence, patience, and purpose. The monarchy is still evolving, shaped by generational change and public expectation. But as it does, it's becoming increasingly clear that Kate will be one of the key people guiding that evolution. Not by force, but by example. And in a world that often values spectacle over substance, that kind of leadership might be the most valuable kind of all.